All right, I mentioned it a little bit, but now we're going to talk about above and below the line items. Super important, and this does refer to a physical line on the form. We'll see this as well. If an item is above the line or below the line, you should definitely know that. If a question asks, not that a question would say this is above the line or below, I mean, it could, but essentially what that also means is it above or below AGI. So if something's above the line, it means that it's an item used to calculate AGI. If it's below the line, it's after calculating AGI. So it's an important figure here, AGI, to calculate what your tax liability is going to end up being. A lot of items are based on AGI, a lot of phase outs, thresholds, all that good stuff. So calculating AGI is super important. And as such, knowing the items that are above the line, which means that they are used in calculating AGI, will be important to understand. Above the line deductions reduce a taxpayer's AGI, while below the line deductions and tax credits reduce taxable income or tax liability. The terms refer to the physical placement of these items on the tax return form, with above the line items listed before AGI and below the line items listed after AGI. Now, the tax forms have changed year to year, and I'll show you where the line is. But there used to be even more of a clear-cut line on these. As such, there is where you get the name from. All right, we're going to dive through some examples of above the line items. These are just some examples. We'll cover everything by the end of the lesson, but here are just some of the more common ones to slowly get you introduced. Again, these are items taken into account when calculating AGI. You'll have your, let's say, wages, and then you'll deduct all of these items if you're eligible for them, and that'll get you to your AGI. And then you've got items after this, which will help you get your taxable amount. Now, these deductions are available to all taxpayers, regardless of whether or not they choose to itemize deductions or take the standard deduction, because that decision happens after AGI. Now here, these are all usually listed on the first page of Form 1040, as we'll see in the next slide. We got these examples here: educator expenses, qualified expenses incurred by eligible educators for classroom supplies, and that amount does change year to year as well, so we'll have that as a number to memorize in our guide. HSA contributions, if you have an HSA plan, usually with a high deductible medical plan with your company, you can contribute into an HSA. That also has a threshold. All these items have income limits, thresholds, and like I said, we will have all these for you to memorize for sure. Super important to make sure you're memorizing them. Any IRA contributions contributing into essentially a 401k, but it's an individual retirement account. This is something where whether you work for a company or not, you can have this and you can contribute into it. Student loan interest, there's income limits and other limits, and we'll deal with all of the limits on various other slides as well. Alimony payments, this is a whole topic because if it's before 2019 or after, there are different tax treatments for alimony payments, receiving or paying. Self-employment retirement plan contributions, contributions made by self-employed individuals to a qualified retirement plan. Self-employed health insurance premiums that are paid by self-employed individuals for themselves, spouse, or dependents. And lastly, half of self-employment tax. This is 50% of the self-employment tax paid by self-employed individuals. All of these items are eligible for deductions for you to reduce your taxable income, first reduce your AGI and then reduce your taxable income. You'll really get familiar with these as we run through questions, run through sims, which, just as a reminder, make sure you're practicing plenty of. Also, make sure you're practicing more sims than multiple choice. Just remember how important those are for the exam. Well, let's see the actual tax form and just line up where these items are. Getting familiar with the tax forms is not only helpful because they essentially act as big calculations, it's also helpful because many sims are just created from the tax forms, which makes sense. Just filling out a tax form makes for a great sim. It's very easy for the exam creators to do that. And then you also see these physical items on the tax form, which also helps you memorize. Here we go. Here is the 1040. Now, like I said, the line used to be just the straight up line on the bottom, but tax forms change year to year. But the concept of above the line, below the line still exists. So here, this red line, it's AGI. So that's wherever AGI is, no matter what year, no matter anything you're taking, no matter what year it is, as long as you know an item is above AGI, it's above the line. If it's below AGI, it's below the line. Just wanted to make sure I'm drilling that down here. And we see a lot of those items here, but a lot of those items will flow from other schedules, such as your Schedule 1, all of that flow through process of the tax forms. Next up, we've got these beautiful below the line items. These are going to be deductions taken after calculating AGI, and they're applied against taxable income. Now, taxpayers can choose between itemizing their deductions or taking the standard deduction. This is something you'll see time and time again. You may see this in sims where, as you decide, Do you itemize? Do you take the standard deduction? Shocker, it's going to be whichever is the higher amount because that's a higher deduction, which means paying less in taxes. Now, yeah, depending on which the option provides greater tax savings. Here are our itemized deductions, which you'll see on the Schedule A. As I will say, and I do say many times, make sure you're memorizing / familiar with these various tax forms, right? You want to make sure that you can visualize it using those tax forms because A, they're a great calculation. B, they're a great way that the exam providers can actually test you because they're a great format for sims. And C, because it's a great way to memorize. You just see them all together on one form. So first off, we've got medical and dental expenses. These are expenses exceeding a certain percentage of AGI. Now, with all of these, they've gone through various changes throughout the years, especially with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. If any of you studied taxes, say pre-2017, right before all that stuff, yeah, you would have seen a very much different Schedule A. And then within all of these, there are various rules. We'll see casualty and theft losses. This has to be in a presidentially, federally declared disaster zone. So if your house burns down, you wouldn't really be able to claim this. But if you're in an area that gets hit by a hurricane and the government recognizes it, that would be different. That used to not be the case. So there have been various changes. Obviously, we want to know it up to current standards, but I do address that because if any of you have studied taxes before all of these nonstop various changes has happened, then I just acknowledging that there. State and local taxes, these are going to be property taxes, state and local income taxes, or sales taxes paid subject to a cap. We will talk about that as well. Home mortgage interest, this is interest paid on qualified home loans, and charitable contributions. These are going to be donations made to qualified charitable organizations. We've got limits for all these. Any sort of limits you need to know will be in the resources that are updated because guess what? These do change sometimes year to year, adjusted for inflation. Now, if you have all of these items and together, or maybe you just have one item and that one item is greater than the standard deduction, then you are going to itemize. So just keep that in mind as you are running through this process. Now, in addition to deductions, tax credits can also be considered below the line items as they are applied against the taxpayer's tax liability after calculating taxable income. And we've got a whole lesson on that, so I'm not going to dive into that there. We've got a whole lesson on tax credits, and you're going to memorize them. You'll be familiar with them. You're going to kick some butt. All right, here is our below the line items here. We got our tax credits, right? Just get familiar with the 1040. If there's one form, I'm not going to say if there's one form to get familiar with to make it the 1040, but there's a lot you need to be familiar with. And just like our memorization guide, if you don't know these core forms, don't go into the exam until you know them, but you will. Just with enough practice, you will. So get familiar with it, kind of just see how it all works. Again, it is one big calculation, and that will help you immensely on Sims, multiple choice, all around.
Hey there! Are you ready to not only pass your CPA exams, but truly understand and enjoy the material while studying? I know it seems impossible, right? Especially to enjoy the material? We'll do it together. Tap into the power of CPA.examprep.ai, where we've got personalized quizzes, multiple choice questions, memorization guides, flashcards, simulations, all tailored to your learning. Our adaptive study planning puts you on the fastest path to success and lifts you back up if you fall behind. Avoid wasting your precious time and money attempting an exam with a low chance of passing, because who wants that? We want to get you through this process as quick as possible. Our exam readiness prediction lets you walk in with confidence, knowing that you're prepared for success on exam day. Thankfully, there's no payment method needed to get started, so why don't you come join us? Visit cpa.examprep.ai and let's achieve your exam success together.